Yeah, I'm going to be talking about an ongoing project. So a lot of this is still in the works. It's a massive collaboration between my unit with the Forest Service Southern Research Station, as well as the Prescribed Fire Lab from the Southern Research Station. Some of those people are in the audience today to help me with any questions that they have more expertise with. But yeah, also we have external partners at NC State and the New Mexico Consortium. So big effort, big project, all about utilizing existing data to try and answer some of these questions about how Helene has impacted forest structure and composition. So a little bit of background. I'm forestry tech at Bent Creek Experimental Forest, which is where this project takes place. And for anyone who isn't familiar, Bent Creek is a 6,000 acre watershed on Pisgah National Forest, just outside of Asheville with parts even within Asheville. So definitely wooey for sure. Humid temperate, about 50 inches of precip annually. Very mountainous, steep topography, although since it is a watershed, we do have some flatter, moister sites as well down along the creek, dominated by oaks, poplar, red maple, the usual. So Bent Creek has a real long history. It was established as an experimental forest in 1925, making it the oldest experimental forest east of the Mississippi, so it has a really rich history. In terms of the establishment, Bent Creek was created in order to sort of look at ways to restore degraded forest land. On the bottom right here, those are some pictures of like early conditions that we were working with. In terms of fire on Bent Creek, since the experimental forest was established, we've done some small burns, usually around like 10 acres for research purposes, but it is challenging to burn out there just given its proximity to Asheville and how popular it is as a recreation site as well, and the terrain. So the data that we wanted to use for this project is from Bent Creek's permanent grid plots. They were established in 2003 at half-mile spacing, so there was originally 44. We upped that to quarter-mile spacing sometime between 2005 and 2007. So now we're sitting at like 160 different plots, so it's a lot of ground to cover. Pre-Helene, our most recent collections occurred sometime between 2013 and 2017. The reasoning for the differing time intervals is just because since it's so many plots and the terrain is difficult, and we're always working on so many projects at the research station, they were doing collections on about a fifth every year, so that's why we have differing intervals. But thanks to the help of all of our collaborators, we were able to get all of these plots remeasured in terms of vegetation last summer. So from that original inventory in about 2003, this is just species makeup. So again, definitely dominated by poplar, oak, maple, sourwood is really common, the usual slough. So after Helene hit, us, like many others, were thinking about how we might quantify these damages to our forests. And we saw that since we had this existing data at a fine spatial scale for an entire watershed in a region that was particularly hard hit by Helene, we hoped that we would be able to resurvey all of these plots and start answering some of these questions about how our forests have changed, as well as looking at fuels. So given that Bent Creek is right outside of Asheville, I think it's important to mention impacts from Helene on Bent Creek. Given that our eastern border is literally the Blue Ridge Parkway, it's surprising that Bent Creek is as slightly damaged as it is. It's similar to what Armin was seeing in the Green River game lands, where it's very patchy, like single tree tip-ups or few tree blowdowns. Nothing like massive acre blowdowns. But we are still concerned, given the number of these small tree tip-ups, about ladder fuels, and also, warming from these small gaps. On the left here, I have a photo courtesy of Steve Norman with SRS, and this is just canopy height loss on a small snippet of Bent Creek. That blob in the middle is actually the Bent Creek Training Center for anyone who's been to a talk there. And yeah, you can see here from yellow, it's about 10% canopy height loss. That dark red is nearing 100% canopy height loss. And you can see that it's just a smattering of these small losses. So sampling design here is just a mock-up of our little plots that we have. They're about 0.05 hectare circles for overstory, and then nested within that we're looking at regeneration subplots. We're also doing 10-meter fuel transects on cardinal directions, and then from center we're doing terrestrial LiDAR scanning, and more on that in a little bit. But so far we've done all the vegetation work last summer. We've got about 60% of the plots were scanned already, leaf on, and then this winter we started scanning leaf off. We got about 25% of those done, because now we're doing them with the paired fuels transects. So it's definitely time consuming. Yeah, and much of this work is ongoing, like I mentioned, so we will be doing more scanning, more fuel transects this summer. We're also starting a wildlife surveying effort where we're using ARUs in different impact plots. And we'll be back out continuing to do vegetation surveys at year 3 and 5. So terrestrial LiDAR scanning, for anyone who may not be familiar, is just LiDAR that we're doing from the forest floor. This is really an emerging technology with a ton of uses and a lot of benefits. So part of the reason we're so interested in using TLS is because of how quick, easy, and repeatable it is. And our collaborators at the Athens Prescribed Science Lab are doing lots of work on testing how accurate these scans are as well. And then this is just an example of what one of those scans looks like from our plot. So the hope when using TLS in this post-Helene landscape is that we can use these scans to answer questions about forest structure and fuels conditions. And all of this data is going to be used in a bunch of ways, but also in fire behavior models. And eventually this data is going to end up on Antigone, which I will get to on the next slide. But here's just a photo of our little scanner. It's about the size of a water bottle. And to just, as an example of how easy it is to use, you press the button, and in most cases the scan is done in a minute. So definitely super quick and easy. So touching on Antigone, this is also a massive collaboration among a bunch of federal agencies. It's basically a database using this standardized TLS data and compiling it in one place for people to pull a bunch of metrics from in terms of site conditions, including fuels. And then just specifically getting into what sort of fuel data we're collecting, kind of just the usual in terms of fuel height and category, litter and duff depth, coarse woody debris. For these 10,000-hour fuels that we are specifically interested in the post-Helene landscape, we're doing a couple additional data points where we're cataloging whether or not they're suspended, and also trying to identify species if we can. So most of this data hasn't been finished being collected or entered, so touching on just some really preliminary stuff, just so you guys can have an idea of what we're seeing out there. Starting with some of this spatial data from the scanner. So on the right here is a photo of a plot where we had more substantial Helene damage. This was taken by the scanner, and on the left we have the point cloud from that scan, and I wanted to include this just to showcase the accuracy of the scan. I mean, the point cloud is so dense that it's almost identical to the photo. Definitely picking up additional fine fuels as well that don't even show up in the photos. So from this plot, we ran those IntelliMon outputs just as an example of the sort of data that you can get from these scans on IntelliMon. This is a really small snippet. When you download data from IntelliMon, you're probably getting hundreds of rows worth of data. This is just an example of some of what's on there. So we've got some overstory type stuff about number of trees, their height, DVH, canopy conditions, and then, yeah, looking at those fuel heights as well. And this is for that last plot, so as you can see, those 1,000-hour fuels on average over a meter, so lots of stuff that's suspended, which we saw in the photo. And then getting into some of the early findings from the vegetation data. And again, this is super preliminary, so this isn't to say that I'm not going to find stuff in models down the line, but so far no abiotic factors are showing any strong relationship to these higher mortality plots that we've found. We've looked at proximity to roads, nearness to running water, slope, elevation, aspect, soil type, and nothing's jumping out at us yet. But when we compare existing inventory data to our most recent inventory, so on the left here is pre-Helene, and then on the right is post-Helene. We were looking at pre-Helene mortality on average about 0.8%, with a max of about 5, median of about 0.5%, whereas post-Helene, all of those statistics doubled. So we're having twice the mortality that we had recorded previously. But it is worth mentioning that the majority of plots are still in this low to no impact zone, and that's just to highlight that in Bent Creek as a whole, we're not seeing massive blowdowns. We're seeing lots of like single to few tree mortality events. And then just a quick look at species, and this is just looking at mortality from that most recent inventory until now, which there's a lot of work to be done there in terms of parsing out which trees were blown down or died from Helene damage versus other things that are happening across Bent Creek, like hemlock woolly adelgid. So again, this is preliminary, but it gives us an idea of what we're seeing. And similar to what Armin spoke about earlier, we're seeing significant increases in mortality of those red oak species, also in black cherry and shortleaf pine. But I think something else might be going on with shortleaf pine because a lot of those were still standing, and it was the highest mortality species in previous inventories too. So likely something else going on there, just as a caveat.
Inventory 2 was 7 years ago?
Yeah, so because of the 5-year spacing, it could have been anywhere from 2013, so it could have been over 10 years, but on average, yeah. So then we were interested in whether or not there was any sort of spatial relationship between these higher mortality plots. So we did a spatial randomness analysis, and what we found is that these higher mortality plots are truly random across the watershed. And that's not to say that there aren't those abiotic factors happening. Again, we have to look more into that, specifically after isolating Helene impact plots. But just from the current data that we have, there doesn't seem to be any sort of spatial relationship between where these higher mortality plots are seemingly randomly dispersed. And this is actually consistent with previous research from Hurricane Opal on Bent Creek in 1995. And then some other things that we are working on is sort of ground truthing estimates of mortality from early spatial data. So this is a snippet from the high form map, and if you guys have heard Steve talk about the high form map, you know that at higher elevations there were some concerns about whether or not we were seeing true mortality or leaf stripping. And we have seen both, where there is a lot of agreement with the high form maps, but in certain instances, like this plot here, we actually saw 0% mortality, so that would have been one of those instances of leaf stripping getting flagged. We're working on using earlier aerial LiDAR from 2021 to do even more recent canopy height loss models. And that will help us really isolate Helene damage from perhaps other mortality that's happening. And I've touched on a lot of this already, but just to rehash it before we get into discussion, we will be doing regeneration work, so seeing what's coming back in these plots after we've had this mortality event. We're going to be looking at how wildlife is responding to these small openings that have been created. Also working on improving estimates of damage from satellite imagery, as well as looking at continued delayed mortality from storm damage in years 3 and 5. And then again, using all of the data from TLS in a bunch of different ways, but also modeling fire and fuel changes. And then I'd just like to acknowledge all of the different individuals and entities that have helped make this work possible. The Ember Alliance has been working on collecting all of those fuels transects. Yeah, and it's just taken an army for sure. And then I'd like to open it for feedback, because one of the main reasons I wanted to come out and talk to you guys today is since this project is still in the early stages, it's a great time for us to receive feedback about directions that we should take this in and what sort of useful outcomes folks would be interested in seeing. Yeah, so feel free to chime in now, and I can jot down some notes, but also you can email me for sure about